Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 18th, 2017. We are live with Daily Coast Radio. Roger Ailes is not live at all, as it turns out. That's this morning's news. We have, of course, to be sensitive to the people who are sad about his passing, and if you find any, let them know, or, I guess lie to them, or whatever you need to do to get through your day. It's a great thing, to be honest. There's not too much we can say about it. I tried for a moment. I thought for a second about just letting it pass with just well, gosh, that's news. But, I wasn't really interested in doing that, and it didn't feel right to me to let it pass this way. What the hell do I care? Best news I heard this morning is it was Illusory Tenant, our Twitter friend, pointing out best news of this one is, well, actually, of course, he couched it in terms of what a great shame it was that he wouldn't be able to enjoy his $44 million severance from Fox News. Well, gee whiz, that's the end of him. So I guess that's nice. I don't know. We'll just leave it there because there's so much more that we could be dealing with. And of course, the news is, well, overflowing, if you will. And as a matter of fact, there's another celebrity death. This one, I guess, people are actually sad about. Was the lead singer of Soundgarden. And I was not a fan in particular, but a lot of people were truly broken up by that news. So condolences to them. The rest of, if you're sad about Roger Ailes, you can go dive off a cliff for all I care. Anyway, I'm sure you'll find solace somewhere. Chris Cornell, the name of the beloved musician who is now dearly departed. Roger Ailes, the name of the scumbag no one ever wanted to see again. All right. I gotta get off the topic and stop speaking ill of the dead or whatever. And I don't know. Should we cover the rest of the news? Where do we start with this one? It's another one of those 2 and 3 outrageous news cycle days. Where do we leave off? I can't even really remember where we left off. But in the meantime, since we've been on the air yesterday, let's see. The special prosecutor was named, and that's good. And it's Robert Mueller, a former FBI director. By all accounts, about as straight a shooter as you're likely to get in that job. I think you were really threading the needle with this whole thing. And of course, the fact that it fell to Rosenstein, the deputy AG, to name a special prosecutor, that left it up in the air. A lot of people were not sure which side he was going to come down on. I saw some good counsel given. I think people just pointing to the Lawfare blog, where some big names in constitutional law were really getting on Rosenstein's back about this and just basically put it to him, not directly necessarily, but the point that they were making was that I think that they shamed him into making this decision to go ahead with naming a special prosecutor. And what a pick. kind of unimpeachable in that he was a former FBI director, and no doubt the record on his nomination and confirmation in the Senate, I assume he was approved overwhelmingly. I never did go back and look at the vote, but a relatively spotless tenure, although, there certainly were failings along the way, and I think toward the tail end of his career, he was on hand to not figure out those anthrax attacks, but what are you going to do? Occasionally, you can't handle a detective case correctly. Anyway, lots of anecdotes coming out about him today, illustrating that he is an upstanding sort of fellow, also a big Comey fan, so not good news for Donald Trump. Keeping my fingers crossed on this one, and we'll see whether Comey goes ahead with his scheduled testimony before Senate committees what was it, in the next couple of days, I think it was what it was scheduled for, and they may now want him to not testify so that he doesn't jeopardize this investigation. We'll see. We'll catch up with all these things. Greg Dworkin is here to help us get a handle on what the headlines have been between yesterday and today so we can remember what broke while we were off the air. It's hard to keep track of these things. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. It really is. So may I make a point?
When? Now?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Go ahead.
This is why you don't want to shame people. We've had this discussion for months. Look what happened with Rosenstein.
Okay.
If you leave him alone, nothing happens. If you go out of your way to shame him, this is how people react.
But it was good.
For us.
Yes.
Not the person who was doing the shaming.
Oh. No, he wasn't. No. Although the articles that I was reading was that there was sort of a professional shaming going on over at Lawfare blog that I think resulted in good news, and I think it was the news they wanted. But it wasn't.
Well, that's true. I mean, and they had some fairly close contacts with him.
Yeah.
And by the way, Matt Schlapp sent the only helpful tweet he's ever sent in his entire life. I think I sent it to you. I think it's down at the bottom as a picture.
Yeah.
But it was a pronunciation guide.
Oh. Okay. What?
Okay, it's the second last thing that's right there on your list. And he tweeted Rosenstein.
Yeah.
Picked Moeller.
Moeller.
After Nunes. It's Robert Moeller. That's how he pronounces his name.
Wow.
Rosenstein picked Moeller after Nunes.
What is it with all this nonsense? I don't know. I mean, these things.
We need our pronunciation guide because we're radio, so you can't get away with it just
Moeller.
by writing it.
Well, that's not even a. I don't know.
I'm
Unless
just saying.
Germans say
it. It's the only useful thing I've seen him. So yeah, the lawfare people were pretty close with Rosenstein.
It is a different kind of shaming, and they weren't, like I said, you weren't calling him a deplorable.
The shaming was done by the White House trying to set up Rosenstein as being the fall guy for why Comey was fired, and that backfired bigly.
It did backfire. I don't know if I would have categorized it as shaming necessarily, but I'll take it for the purpose
they did.
of discussion.
You're one of our people. You'll do what we say. I want you to, create a illusion that you did this for careful, considered reasons. And then about 15 minutes after it's out, I'll go and do an interview with Lester Holt and say that's not why I did it. I did it because I felt like it.
Oh, yeah. Well,
that's what happened. And so, really embarrassed the guy.
That's true.
And that's where that lawfare, push came from.
Yes.
Don't be like this.
Right.
Look what he did to you.
That's true. So it was pointing out that he had been shamed by someone else, I guess.
Yes, and that's why you don't go out of your way to do that, because this is the inevitable result if they're capable. Not everybody's capable.
Oh, well, that's good.
So what does he do? He appoints Robert Mueller. And it turns out that across the aisle, everybody says, cool, we like him, he's good. He's Comey's mentor. Yeah. And the idea that he's going to sit on stuff and hide it, is not likely. The thing is, though, that his role as special counsel is really to go after the criminal stuff. And that's really going to hang Mike Flynn, and it's going to hang especially lots of stories about Mike Flynn today we're going to talk about. And it may wind up taking Mike Pence down with him. Yeah. Because Pence lied basically to the American people about not knowing anything about Flynn, when in fact the entire Trump transition team knew that Flynn had very shady dealings and was under investigation prior to being picked as national security advisor, which occurred because Flynn went to the consiglieres and told Jared and Ivanka he wanted that job, so they gave it to him. And also Jared was implicated in pushing Trump to fire Comey, so there's some kind of weird loyalty to Flynn that is as yet unexplained that Mueller will be looking at. That's me tying up the whole thing in a package.
I got, although I did see an alternative theory on Kushner, but I think we'll discuss it later, unless you want to.
No, yeah. What's the alternative?
The alternative theory on Kushner was that
my basic theory is he's stupid.
He is. And he's stupid about another thing. Not even a different thing. He was probably stupid about the first thing too. But the new theory is that he got vocal about firing Comey after the story broke about his sister selling visas in China, and apparently word got back to him that that was going on the FBI's investigative list, and I never saw that news. But then he began pushing for firing Comey. And
if that's the case, he's really stupid,
Yeah.
because that would mean he's completely politically naive and would have no idea
Yeah.
of
that's
the
the story.
firestorm that would happen, plus the centrality of the Flynn story to what's going on, with his sister's story being an interesting, byproduct of the fact that the whole thing is corrupt. Unless, of course, it's all the same story, which is that the Trump organization is completely funded by the Russians. And by the way, there's plenty of information that that's not a crazy theory.
Yeah, there's so much today. I don't even know if we can get in all the little bits about it. But
Oh,
it was
we can't.
quite
But
a
see,
bit.
that's the whole thing. That's what Mueller is looking at, and he's looking at the different pieces which might have criminal, repercussions. Whereas what's going on in the Senate Investigative Committee and House Investigative Committee is a more counterintelligence kind of look. So they have different provenance. They have different goals. It's just that appointing Mueller does quiet the feeling that things were peaking, and that all of a sudden things were going to explode, which is good because that's not how it works, and that's not how it was ever going to work. There's going to be new stories every day, just like the Times is doing, about Mike Flynn contacts with Turkey, which were inappropriate. There's a story in McClatchy this morning. Something like 18 contacts otherwise not discussed with the Russians, how Kislyak and Flynn were talking about setting up a back channel so that Putin and Trump get caught directly without going through the national security apparatus. Why don't you want that to happen? Because of what just happened in the White House with Trump giving up the very, very sensitive intelligence information that might get agents out in the field killed. So this is going to slow things down, except that it's inevitable and inexorable, and it cannot in any way, shape, or form be good news for the White House, which is why Donald Trump is tweeting about it this morning.
Yes.
I mean, the funniest tweet is Dana Perino. I have this one from 8:25 p.m., 17th of May, 2017. Which would be yesterday evening, right? Yeah. This DOJ decision gives the White House a good opportunity. Don't comment on the special counsel. Do use the time to focus relentlessly on policy agenda. All right. So what happens this morning? Trump tweets something along the lines of, "This is the greatest witch hunt in American political history."
He loves history.
The exact quote is, "This is the single greatest witch hunt of a politician in American history." Oliver Griswold suggests Christine O'Donnell call your office.
Yes, well, she's not one, so she's not going to want to. She knows enough not to get involved in this one.
Right. Everybody noted that advice was ignored pretty quickly. So Trump is raging about it this morning, which is exactly what you'd expect with a 10-year-old who's totally out of control. And let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here. We have all the different specifics here about the details of which Trump associates had what kind of contact inappropriately with foreign powers, and that's what's being investigated. But the overall bigger picture is Trump is completely incapable of being president and managing his job.
Yes, that is a problem, isn't it?
It is. And so, tomorrow, and I don't understand why they're doing this, and I don't understand why they don't just cancel it. Tomorrow, Trump is supposed to take this trip overseas. And this just takes him and his entire staff, and since the White House hasn't been yet staffed up with all the associates and assistants to actually do the work.
Yeah.
The entire senior staff basically is leaving with him on this trip to manage him so he doesn't get us into a nuclear war while he's away on vacation.
Have we got...
And there's nobody to mind the store, so all the stuff's going to come out, and then they're not going to be here to manage it as badly as they're doing. At least they're trying to manage it. There's nobody to manage it when he takes his entire family with him.
Do we have gates or a barn door or anything, the country that we can, close?
Lock him out and let him not come back?
And just say, Israel is in your jurisdiction now. Up to you, man.
I'm sorry, but these custom lines are just like a bear. You're going to have to be going through this for the next 2 years. No, I am so sorry.
I was just thinking about long lines of revoking the diplomatic passport while he was in the air. I
mean, not so
we want
easy.
the plane back if we can get it.
Right. But the bottom line is you have all of this going on with Mueller's investigation happening and an unhappy White House, and it's going to consume them. They can't even manage the day-to-day what they've been doing up until this point. And what have they been doing up to this point? Creating crises for themselves. So if a real crisis comes up, they're totally incapable of dealing with something like that. So you have that going on, and now you have the Mueller and the other Senate and House investigative committees who cannot stop doing what they're doing. Remember how quaint it was when Devin Nunes was trying to stop all of this? And Jason Chaffetz was claiming there's nothing there, and Paul Ryan said, I don't want to talk to you about it, and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's like ancient history now.
Yeah. And, rats. How do we, Nunes, is now, implicated again.
Oh, what did he do this time?
Well, it turns out that the in-depth reporting on Flynn and his Turkish connection, which I don't think we've gotten to yet today.
Yeah.
That the big news on that, just quickly by way of background, is that essentially, somebody summed it up very nicely and said essentially that Flynn put the kibosh on a resupply of Kurdish fighters fighting ISIS. The Obama administration considered the Kurdish militia to be the most effective fighting force against ISIS. And there was some question as to whether or not to do some resupply and launch this particular offensive against ISIS.
Here's the headline from McClatchy.
Yeah, okay,
Flynn stopped military plan Turkey opposed after being paid as its agent.
Yes, there you go. So that sums it up pretty quickly. In other words, the big Mr. Anti-ISIS guy that Trump
he took $500,000 to do what Turkey wanted him to do.
For $500,000,
this happening, this story coming out at a time that Turkey bodyguards were beating up protesters in D.C.
Right. Even the Turkey story could take all day.
Yes.
So anyway, in this series of meetings, we're reminded that Devin Nunes, out of nowhere, found himself at the table for all of these meetings with the Turkish leadership alongside Flynn. He's back in the middle of this whole thing because Turkey's hot again. They paid the guy to turn his head on ISIS. ISIS.
We're talking about Flynn.
Yeah.
The national security
and
advisor.
Nunes was there to see the deal go down, and then
said,
"There's
nothing
around,
here. Why it's a witch hunt? Why are you picking on this guy?"
Right. And I'm getting secret intelligence from the White House, so I can't tell you where the guy is.
See, so that's the point.
Mueller
is going to be working on
Why do we believe Matt Schlapp?
Mueller's going to be working on the criminal parts of this. And I came across this Congressional Research Service piece. I sent it to you last night, called Independent Counsels, Special Prosecutors, Special Counsels in the Role of Congress. I don't know if you want to even deal with that. I just thought it was really interesting in terms of terminology, and maybe we could put it into the summary of the show for
Matt
people
Schlapp
to read if they want to.
Pronounced Special Counsel.
Yeah, and also it's spelled Councel.
Trump's second misspelling of counsel. Yeah, all right. I don't hit him too hard for the...
For the second time?
Yeah, for the misspelling counsel.
The helpful thing is when he does that is you have an idea he actually did it himself.
Yes, that's true.
It's like a fingerprint.
I mean, I make typos, but geez.
I make typos, but then I know it's me, right?
That's
because
true.
if I had staff do it, it would be typed correctly.
Well, who knows? He's got a terrible stuff.
In any case. So big picture here is Mueller is appointed, and it quiets down a little bit, the outcry. But while this is happening, the press is doing their job and coming out with the Flynn story about Russian contacts, the Flynn story about Turkish contacts, and you get the distinct impression that there's a lot of fire there to go with the smoke, and that Flynn, and we haven't even gotten to Manafort or Carter Page, are certainly in jeopardy of having broken the law, and that's why Mueller should do that. And by the way, they knew about this. They knew that Flynn was being investigated. That's the big story from the Times yesterday. And they still appointed him. And one of the people who is implicated in this is the head of the transition team, because the transition team supposedly knew that Flynn was being investigated and appointed him anyway. And who is the head of the transition team? Mike Pence. So the idea that Pence could go on TV and claim to people that I knew nothing about this, it's not me.
It's Nunes.
You can't do that.
He's not in on it.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, boy, everybody got it yesterday. I mean, for all the people who were worried about, well, I'd love to see Donald Trump impeached, but that just means we get President Pence. I don't know. I'm not so sure anymore.
So that's question number one from our readers.
Oh, okay.
To you and to Armando, if he happens to be around, we know the succession list.
Yeah, right.
If Trump goes, it's Pence. If Pence goes, it's Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
But in fact, if Trump is impeached, then Pence becomes president, but then he appoints a vice president.
If he can.
Right? So, I mean, that's what happened with Nixon. Ford became president, and then Ford had a vice president of his own. If anything had happened to Ford, it would be his vice president who then became president. In those days, right? The Nelson Rockefeller.
Yes, I mean, if that had gone forward, and I don't know.
So Ryan is not in the list right now in terms of we have to worry that he's going to be president.
Well, I got him taken care of too, but all right. I don't know. I'm not certain.
It would be Trump. It would be Pence, and then it would be Pence's vice president, whoever that person is.
Yeah. Although,
from a practical point of view, now if it happens before he has a vice president, sure.
Did the Senate not vote on Gerald Ford's nomination as vice president?
I have to go back. That's the process part of it that people were curious about, and I'm not completely clear on it. All I remember is that, it went from Nixon to Ford, and then Ford did have, in fact, a vice president as he functioned as president for a while before he lost to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. Man, it's complex. Okay.
So that's question number one. And question number two is, since the Mueller appointment brings up the idea of criminal activity.
By the way, it's the House of Representatives, believe it or not, that votes on the nomination of the vice president.
There you go.
How do you like that?
Those are the kinds of things we ought to be boning up on at this particular point in time.
That's right.
Banering up on.
We don't know how to pronounce anything. Matt Schlub tells me I got to change it.
Yeah. So,
the way he pronounces
but yeah, I mean, so it's helpful to keep that in mind. And then the other part of it.
Yeah.
Is if Mueller is going to be looking at a wide range of things, including which of the Trump aides might be at criminal risk, then he also gets to look at whether or not there's obstruction of justice going on. He could if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part. He could do whatever he wants. It's a very wide range appointment, and the only person who can get rid of him, by the way, is Rosenstein.
Man,
Trump can't fire him. He can ask Rosenstein to fire him. He can replace Rosenstein, and that person can fire him. But the firing has to come from the Justice Department. So there's a little bit of insulation about Mueller just disappearing.
Wow.
If Trump wanted it.
Abby, do you have something to say?
Hang on a second. I got to take care of
That's okay. If it's Devin Nunes, don't answer the door. You can use this opportunity to clarify something fun about the whole situation. As it turns out, when a vice presidential vacancy is filled, both the House and the Senate vote on it. I was skimming too quickly. The United States Senate, in the case of Gerald Ford, voted 92-3 to confirm Ford. On November 27th, if you care. Only 3 senators voted against Ford's confirmation, and in case you want to know who they are, Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, Thomas Eagleton of Missouri, and William Hathaway of Maine. Yay, Maine. On December 6th, then, the House confirmed Ford by a vote of 387-35. I don't have the list of who voted no on that one. But both the House and Senate do vote on a vice presidential vacancy under the dictates of the 25th Amendment. Hooray. Hooray for the 25th Amendment. We've finally invoked you.
Yes. So always useful. Anyway, so to get back to this other point, so you have people at risk and criminal investigations may in fact happen, and that's the Mueller implication in terms of him existing, and it's hard to get rid of him. And so if you're going to look at obstruction of justice, then you have to bring in the whole thing about whether Trump was asking Comey to somehow slow down the case or look the other way with Flynn. If that's true, then does that become part of the investigation? If it becomes part of the investigation, does Comey really go up. Boy,
What a day. My refrigerator is still broken, by the way.
I know.
Do
you see what happens when my staff leaves and leaves me alone here?
It's really rather remarkable. Okay.
So, with all of that happening, does Comey really go up and testify on the Hill?
Good
and
question.
Does Mueller actually turn over those memos? Or does that become part of the investigation and they say we can't give it to Congress right now, even though you asked for it, because it's part of what we're looking at?
Yeah.
So if those
How
memos
fun would that
don't
be?
go over to Congress, is that worse than if they do?
I don't know.
Does that mean that they're part of what he's looking at? And so do we get upset because it's not being turned over, or do we think, oh, gee, there must be something there? It's like when Comey refuses to talk about something as opposed to talking about something. If you talk about it, it's not that important. If you say, I can't talk about that, we're in the middle of an investigation, then you go, oh.
Yeah.
Right? So that raises that point. And then the final piece here is, okay, so if we are talking about obstruction of justice, and that is under Mueller's purview, then the lawyer question to you and to Armando is, does Trump's continuing tweets make it harder and put him at more legal jeopardy? Because if he keeps complaining that he's being treated like the worst politician ever and people are being unfair to him and it's a witch hunt, and complains about, let's say, Mueller, is that more obstruction of justice? Are these tweets putting him simply at political risk, or are they putting him in any legal risk? Because the other flip side of that coin is that what Trump is blatantly trying to do is gin up his own base for protection and use ordinary Americans who voted for him as a shield. He wants to polarize this as much as possible, and he wants Trump voters to think none of this is real, none of this is true. It's all about trying to remove me so that they take your vote away from you because the liberals are trying to screw you yet again.
Yeah.
And that's the only purpose of those tweets. And so he's doing it with a purpose. But what's the flip side? What's the danger to him in doing that?
Untold. I can't predict it. I imagine any lawyer would tell him don't tweet. I mean,
yeah, and he did anyway.
It's just a matter of I don't know whether I would. It's impossible to tell whether he's putting himself at any more legal risk or not. I would just say most lawyers would just tell him don't tweet because there's always a risk that anything you say, anything you put on the record.
Don't make our job more difficult.
Or really don't make the other side's job any easier. But yeah, we don't want any more things we have to defend or explain away. We don't want to give them any more ammunition to attack you with. Don't say anything because we can't anticipate A, what you'll say, and B, what kind of legal jeopardy might spring from it. But I can tell you what legal jeopardy springs from saying nothing. None. Go with that. So I don't know. I mean, it's all in all likelihood he'll say something that'll get him in legal trouble because he has no sense of where that line is about anything. So if you have to bet, if you won't accept, well, I don't really know is the answer. The only acceptable answer is the more he tweets, the more legal trouble he's likely to get in. Yes.
Well, I would think if he just continues to rage tweet, which is what he tends to do.
Yeah.
Then, the tweet you're looking for is the one where he threatens Mueller.
Right.
Right? That would not be a good thing.
That would not be a good one. There's really nothing he can say at this point that's any good for anything except literally to just do pro forma president stuff. Today's National Bagel Day.
Yeah. So again, stepping back and looking at the big picture, we have a special counsel who's been appointed who's going to look into a lot of those details. Because he now exists, it may well be that things slow down as he takes a look at the landscape, sees what evidence he has. He may wind up looking at those memos rather than Congress, and it may be less public. But that doesn't mean it's any less important. And while it's less public, the things that will come out are that which the press is revealing. And there seems to be a press bombshell every day. There has been every day this week. Somewhere around 5 or 5:30 p.m. every night, there's a new revelation that is a bombshell as big as the one that came before. And so far this week, there's been, more than one a day.
Yes, big argument for bringing back the evening edition of newspapers, which I guess we have now because we're all online.
That's right. That's the equivalent to the evening edition. So you have all of that going on.
Extra.
And then you have the, okay, so what's the reaction of the public? And the reaction of the public, there's Morning Consult polling out saying that, again, Trump's base is not solid. Whereas it's still 83% of Republicans support him. The strong support is dropping in every poll. I got a newsletter from Morning Consult this morning saying that it's eroded even further and that the solid, support for Trump among that, again, every time they do a poll, drops and drops and drops. I was just looking at Real Clear Politics this morning for the graph, and I'll just send that over to you so you can take a peek at it too. It'll be at the very, very bottom.
Politics.
Okay. There we go. And so Trump's job approval right now is 39.8 in the aggregate, and his disapprove is 55, and that's about the biggest gap he's had. The disapproval is certainly the highest it's been the entire time since his election. So, whatever creeping help he got in terms of job approval from the Syrian missile strikes, gone. And, we still haven't, gotten the full polling result of all of this stuff happening. And again, you're going to hear some really stupid takes, and this is why I'm going over this. And the dumbest take, which is the most predictable take, is, well, Trump's base still supports him. Well, first of all, they're still a minority. They're less than 40%. They only have about 15% to fall. And the fact that the strong support is starting to disappear means that is not as solid as it was. And if you continue to have Republicans pushed by the public, which you are and which you have had, in Congress, for example, and other places, demanding special prosecutors, which we now have at least a special counsel. And if you say that, you still have to go and you do these investigations, which the Susan Collinses of the world are still saying.
She did say it was deeply troubling.
Yeah, well, you know what else she said? She said, you take a look at this and it just looks like the whole place is complete chaos. And I said, thank you, Susan Collins. Thank you for using the word chaos because, we're big on that.
Right.
And we think that that's been true from the beginning, and we think that that's part of their plan. And we think that it doesn't help them, even though they think it does.
Man. She did say something outrageous, not outrageous, but weird. She's just fumbling for things to say, and I guess they weren't satisfied with deeply troubling or deeply concerning, and she babbled some kind of thing about the separation of powers and the three branches of government, and he doesn't know where the line is, Trump, and it didn't even make any sense because, of course, Comey is and Trump are in the same branch. I don't know. She was just looking for something to say, I guess. She's reached her limit.
Well, speaking of doesn't know, there's a Reuters story out, and this is great. This is embroiled in controversies. Trump seeks boost on foreign trip, as if that's going to happen. As if he's going to go to Saudi Arabia and talk about Islam, and he's not going to have any problems, right? Because he just does all his homework and prepares everything. And they're talking in this article about how he prepares for the trip. And here's the line that caught my eye.
Yeah.
To prepare for this trip, Trump has been meeting with briefers, including Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
He doesn't know anything.
Exactly. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, White House National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, Deputy National Secretary Dina Powell, and Senior Advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner. Now here's where it gets good. Conversations with some officials who have briefed Trump and others are aware of how he absorbs information and portray a president with a short attention span. He likes single-page memos and visual aids like maps, charts, graphs, and photos. National Security Council officials have strategically included Trump's name in as many paragraphs as we can because he keeps reading if he's mentioned.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I read that and I just doubled over with laughter. I mean, he's not a narcissist or anything.
No problems like that. Yeah, I figured once I read that one, I said that must explain why they explained to the briefers when the CIA comes to brief him, if it's your job to present, which he doesn't like for it to go very long. I think they trained them every once in a while when you put his name in a lot, and then you got to lean in and like purse your lips and shake your head and say, "Who's a good boy? Who's a good president?"
Like that. And then it says Trump likes to look at a map of the country involved when he learns about a topic. I wonder if he knows where North Korea is, since according to a story that came out the other day, most Americans don't.
Wow. Yeah, they put it all over. They showed a map. I saw it. There's the map.
It was all over the United States.
Dots all over. And they were putting the dots, put a dot where North Korea is. I mean, there's dots all over Japan. I mean, I think it's very famous.
London. I mean, it was all over Europe.
Was it? Oh my
pretty
God!
amazing.
How do you? All right. Well, please. Well, maybe Trump doesn't know, and he could be bombing the wrong place. Oh, or that explains the Carl Vinson. All right. Well, now I finally figured that one out. Yes, it is going to Korea. If you think Korea.
If you think Korea's in London or Australia.
Right. Oh, all right. Man, Kushner. I'm glad he's advising him on his whole big trip to Saudi Arabia.
Right. Anyway, so the aggregate from RCP is very close to the Gallup daily. That is to say, Trump is at 38 and approval and 57 disapproval. The country does not like him. They don't think he's qualified. They don't think he's doing a particularly good job. And it doesn't matter that there's core Trump supporters who don't want to hear any of this. Now, it'll be an interesting thing to see what happens when Fox News starts to cover some of these events. Yeah, they'll be like a week slow. But you have to look at the bigger picture. The fact that they really haven't covered it properly in the first couple of days doesn't matter. What matters is how they cover it a week from now and 2 weeks from now. And by the way, Roger Ailes is dead.
Yes. As it turns out, that was all true.
So,
I wasn't just making that up.
He probably knew, so I don't think I'm shocking him by throwing that in and discussing Fox News.
What, that he was dead?
But he was 77 and he apparently died this morning or yesterday, and the announcement was this morning.
Yes, everyone will have to sue his estate instead of him. It'll be very sad.
Yeah, well, those things happen. So I'm over it.
Yep.
Everybody will give him credit for being an incredible visionary who changed the face of news. This is all true. But they have to remember that he was disgraced, and he is still at his estate certainly is still, he's beyond it. His estate is at legal risk for a lot of the stuff that happened at Fox. And Fox, of course, is in a major transition, losing not only a lot of their stars, but also to controversy and to scandal, but they're losing market share too. So, all of that will matter. And maybe the bigger story here isn't whether or not Trump voters still support Trump, but that Fox News is losing market share. And, that in the end may wind up affecting Trump voters more than anything else.
Wow. Well, man, I don't know what to say. By the way, I think I may have forgotten to put this one aside, but there was another. Well, you know what? I'll do my shopping for the bits and pieces of the news in a few minutes. We'll just wrap this up and say, okay, I don't want to get distracted. Is there more that have we made it through your list? Anything else happen while you were talking?
Well, let's see. There's, I think, the major thing here. The big story, I think, from the New York Times, Trump team knew Flynn was under investigation before he came to the White House. Again, don't want to let Mike Pence skate on that. Flynn stopped military plan Turkey opposed after being paid as its agent. There are really substantive things that are going on here.
Oh, I remember.
And then Aaron Blake interviewed Matthew Miller. The guy who predicted Comey's memos thinks Comey may be trying to take down Trump. The guy who predicted that Matthew Miller predicted that Comey probably had a paper trail turned out to be right, and so they went to him, hey, you were right about that. What else do you think is going on?
That. Okay, but yeah, I mean, all right, so he did it in public, very nice. I mean, it's a good job, good call to get to the press with it first, but I think everybody who knew how, well, I don't know, how government operates knows that there would be a file of such things. I get, which is why.
Well, Miller is a DOJ guy, so he was there during the Obama administration, I guess, a spokesperson. So he has a pretty good idea of how things were.
Yes, that's who you'd want to turn to for that news. I'm glad he made prominent mention of it early.
Yeah, but
he deserves to look good.
You know what he thinks is that a lot of this stuff has been preserved, and there's a lot more to come out, and that's why what Mueller does with it after Congress has asked for all of this tends to be so important.
Yeah, that's it. And it does raise another interesting issue, which I guess we'll try and shoehorn in here, is now you have a situation where Congress will be looking for the memos and the tapes, as it turns out. They actually subpoenaed everything they could get that would tell them about the meetings between Comey and Trump, if there are any tapes, and we're still not sure about that. But now with, I don't know if I want to believe Matt Schlapp. With Mueller doing this investigation, it is possible that he may request, A, that Comey not testify, and B, he may actually contest turning the memos over.
Yes, that was my point. Yes. And so that may be a good thing, not a bad thing, if that happens.
It may be, or it could turn into a disastrous thing in some way. It will be an interesting contest as between Congress saying we have the power to subpoena these things, and you may have to, you may be looking at Mueller saying, I'm conducting this investigation under the authority of the executive branch, and I assert executive privilege over these memos, and they should not be turned over to Congress. And then the chief executive will be Donald Trump. And what will he do? Will he override Mueller's executive authority to assert executive privilege and hand the memos over? Or agree with Mueller and say, yes, he correctly asserts executive privilege? Congress may then disagree, and then the big irony of it all is, and I wasn't even thinking about this when I tweeted this yesterday, you now have a Gorsuch sitting on the Supreme Court where the question of who gets to assert executive privilege and is it valid as against the congressional subpoena falls to Gorsuch, whose mom invented the problem, essentially.
But doesn't it go to Merrick Garland first?
Yes, it does. And if no one believes Merrick Garland, or if he doesn't get on the panel, although I'm sure they could engineer an en banc rehearing if necessary. And then, I'm just throwing out the irony of ironies. This is like, you
can't make this up. If you wrote this as a script, they'd say, no, that's not. That's too ridiculous.
Either that, or if you put them in costume and put it on Masterpiece Theater and said it was about the English royal line of succession, that they would believe.
Right.
Everybody coming back into the picture.
But what if you framed it differently? Because really the framing of all of this is what we're trying to keep in mind here. What if the very same situation Congress requests and Mueller refuses, but it's framed thusly? Congress says, we want these memos because we are exerting our oversight functions. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. That's why Jason Chaffetz is the one that's asking for it.
Right.
And Mueller says, I can't give it to you. This involves a criminal investigation.
Right.
And that would really screw that up. And so I don't want to do that. And then you go back and say, well, what criminal investigation could this possibly be involved with? Well, the only thing would be obstruction of justice, really. Otherwise, why would that be relevant?
Yeah. That creates quite the conundrum. No real...
And that's even without invoking the whole executive privilege conundrum, which, of course, would be the process by which they would claim to not have to give it up.
It would be amazing. I almost want to see this happen. And I guess, I'm, as you're saying it, I'm imagining Mueller playing this very differently depending on what time you reach him or who he's talking to. But essentially having knowing that it would actually be politically deadly for those memos to become public, but he's certainly dedicated to, or appears to be a guy who's dedicated to the integrity of his investigation. So he would be worried about that. But then seeing the chief executive try to overrule his invocation of executive privilege and insisting that Congress does get the memos, thinking better that they be in the hands of allies in Congress than an enemy in the special prosecutor's office. But they'll be in both hands if that happens. And I could just see Mueller kind of doing the don't stop, come back thing. And like,
yes,
oh, wow,
exactly.
What do you know? Now,
right
now they're
Willy
all
Wonka.
public. Gee whiz. Oh, look. A public record published by Jim Comey saying, yes, today Donald Trump offered me $50,000 to drop the whole thing, whatever's in the damn memos. I mean,
so having gone through all of that, again, step back, look at the big picture. The fact that there's a special counsel that's been appointed does not make any of this stuff go away. The person who was picked is not a friend of the White House. This in no way, shape, or form is going to be helpful to Donald Trump. It's most interesting that I see some of the meta-analysis, because remember, after you get the news, then you start getting the bad takes. And, some of the bad takes from the Republicans are, this is great news because now this will exonerate Trump.
Yeah, that is great.
What are the chances that Trump is going to be exonerated given the fact that we already know what we know about Michael Flynn just from today?
Yeah.
What a dumb take.
We haven't seen there hasn't been an
We've
exoneration
been
since.
encouraging the president to go ahead and get this done because we want him exonerated. He's not acting like a person who feels like he's going to be exonerated. Look at the tweets.
Although, I guess, one last thing we'll throw in there just as a plot twist. It doesn't have to be the last item, but I think my last plot twist is Republicans who have buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of them are this smart, but if they talked to a smart person, they might say, you know what you need to do is you need to be out there saying, good, we should get this all out on the record, all in the public domain, let everybody see it so we can exonerate our totally innocent president. How does Trump attack you for that? But what you've just done is called for spilling the beans as much as possible, as publicly as possible on Trump, because you think he's totally innocent.
Right.
So he can't get mad with you about that. He might not be able to read between those two lines. That would be brilliant.
All right. So just to raise your blood pressure, I turned on Morning Joe this morning just because I wanted to see if there was more breaking news, because there's always breaking news. I made the mistake of watching Greta last night when some of this special prosecutor stuff was breaking, because I wanted breaking news and realized just how awful a show it is on MSNBC. Right. So I already knew how awful a show Morning Joe was.
Right.
So I turned it on this morning. At least I did enjoy John McCain insulting Morning Joe this morning. That was fun.
Quite the masochist, Joe.
Yeah. So what happened is, Mika and Joe are getting married.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and so they had John McCain to talk about this being worse than Watergate. And Joe Scarborough built up McCain as he always does. He's the hero, true. He did all this stuff in terms of the Hanoi Hilton, all true and all of that. Built him up. And McCain looks at them and says, forget about all of that. I simply, want to, wish you the best. And, I hear you're getting married. And, Mika, all I can say is I hope you love him as much as he loves himself. And it was actually pretty funny.
McCain has a couple in him.
So that was a very good one. But then I heard Barnacle come on and said, there's a part of this we haven't really covered yet. How are Trump voters going to feel? How are their feelings going to be affected by the whole idea that the country is trying to take away their rightfully elected president? How are they going to deal with this? Presenting them all as special snowflakes.
It's a question.
And it is a question. And, I thought as a physician, this is similar to how you have to deal with anti-vaxxers. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's an answer. There's a logic. There's a position. And then you have people who absolutely don't want to accept it and want to go with alternative facts. And you can't just hit them on the head with a hammer. That's not going to work. And so my point here is that it's not going to be simple, and it's going to take a whole lot of work to do that. The best way to do that in this case is presenting the facts, and it's also best presented by somebody who they are more prepared to listen to as a messenger. So, the best advocates for vaccines are moms of children, especially moms of children who unfortunately have been injured by the illnesses that the vaccines are attempting to prevent. That and the trusted physician are the two best messengers, not the Bill Maher's of the world, or the Jenny McCarthy's. And in the case of Trump voters, it's going to take Republicans and conservatives talking to them, telling them that no, there's fire here along with the smoke. It can't just come from our radio show and Daily Kos. We're not the messengers that they're most interested in listening to. And so it's going to be interesting just to keep an eye on the conservative media sphere, the Roger Ailes side, and see how it's being covered and see what kind of messages the Trump voters are going to get. Again, this is going to be a very slow process, and it's going to be a lot of work, and it's not going to be all settled in a week. So how they cover it today and tomorrow isn't as important as how they cover it over the course of the next weeks and months.
Man, I wanted to get this done by Friday.
I know, we all did. And again, a mole is probably the best way to proceed for the country, but it's going to slow things down. And so that's just a reminder that things aren't going to happen as fast as you want. It's Washington, and it never does. But in this particular case, there were reasons.
Well, as long as there's some of those.
Yeah.
We forgot to get to, and I guess it's all
including
right.
building a case, and including not just building a criminal case, but building a case for the Trump voters who are going to have to hear this step by step by step. And this is a case where you can't go from step 1 to step 10. You have to do it step by step. Otherwise, they're never going to get it and accept it.
Man. What if they never do? And
some of them won't. You have to outvote them. That's okay.
Okay.
But you want, a working majority to do it, and then let the rest figure it out.
Okay. Well, by the way, we took care of bringing the Coast Guard around yesterday.
Didn't we? He came up to Connecticut and just told them what a wonderful job that Trump was doing, and how unfair, things were. And he also mentioned to the Coast Guard that they should love him because he defends aircraft carriers and F-35s, neither of which are under the purview of the Coast Guard.
Right, but they sure do make zoomy noises.
They do.
And that's sort of military.
True. And don't forget, we've done all this whole discussion today. We haven't even mentioned the elections coming up. There is a way for the public to let, people know exactly what they think about this beyond polls. Yeah. And that is polls. That is to say, election polls. Go to the poll, vote.
Montana, Georgia.
Montana's coming up on the 25th of May, and Georgia, I believe, is June 20. And they're going to be hugely important. And we have to not forget that. And we have to not forget November 2018. So with all of that, that's my summary for the day, all wrapped up. This is Greg Working speaking to my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning. I really enjoyed the show yesterday with you and Armando, and maybe we'll get back to that. So just a reminder to say hi, Rochester. We haven't forgotten you. Just because you've been on for a few days doesn't mean we think you're not important, and we don't want to mention you. And to everybody else who's listening, thanks so much. And David will be back tomorrow, and I'll be back on Monday.
Yes.
There'll be 17 different stories and scandals that happen between now and then.
Also, Joe Lieberman. Just wanted to throw that in there before you go.
Why did you do that?
He was here yesterday. We traded you.
He's going to be a guest on the show tomorrow.
You said, yeah, right. That's
I'll
exactly
get to strangle him right on the air.
Why not? We'll bring him in, and apparently his name being floated. What was it for
FBI
director
replacement?
I think that's just trolling, but okay. I'm glad we didn't really have to discuss that, but I'll toss it in there because there's still 10 stories we missed. Thank you, Greg, and thank you for the extra time.
Yeah, take care.
All right, you do the same.
Abby says thank you too.
Oh yes, thanks, Abby, and I'll answer the phone for you.
Yeah,
next time.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Joe Lieberman was brought in to troll the world yesterday. I don't think that he's under any serious consideration, but I don't know. Even if he is, so what? Fine, make him FBI director. What do I care? Anyway. You just need to shrug your shoulders at that one and say, he's terrible, and it would be a stupid distraction of a thing, but, who cares? I think it's just, that was really roughly the equivalent of saying he was going to bring, Paula Jones and Jennifer Flowers to the debate and sit them in the front row. So I think that sounds like a Bannon thing. When we bring in Lieberman, it'll trigger the libs. Well, it didn't work. It did in the sense that people said, what? He's terrible. I hate that guy. But, we're already, it didn't take our eye off of the rest of the 10,000 balls juggling in the air. Yes, Trump spoke at the Coast Guard Academy's graduation yesterday. Did we cover that on the front page over at Daily Kos? I'm just kind of scrolling by to see if we had anything on it. There wasn't much to it except for the fact that he got up there and said, congratulations to the graduates, although really it's all about me. And that was where he began his crusade of telling everybody about more about his views of history. Not only has he nailed it on Andrew Jackson and the Civil War, and now, of course, correctly identifying himself, that's correctly, Quor. That's how Matt Schlapp actually says it's pronounced. Correctly identifying himself as the victim of the greatest witch hunt in American history. And, of course, Ernest Twitter is out there telling him about the actual Salem witch trials. Yesterday he was crying about the way he's been treated in the press. And he told the graduates, as you go out into the world, just remember, it's all about me. No politician in history has been treated worse or more unfairly than me. I guess he's got it worse, and it's horrible what America has done to him. Of course, also Ernest Twitter pointing out to him the number of American presidents who've been assassinated, and going way back in history, other political assassinations throughout the world. Yes, politicians have been treated worse with him. By the way, I thought he wasn't a politician, but maybe now he acknowledges it. He's already got Potomac fever and is counting himself as the greatest in history. So he's the greatest witch. He's also the most unfortunate in terms of the treatment. And then he went on to give your standard graduation speech after that. After I made it all about me, it was time to say, right, go out there and fight anyway, and you'll eventually win. That's why I won. Here's a map of how big I won. Does everybody know how many electoral college votes? Well, it was a day. I can tell you that. Yeah, so what next? I mean, what else? What do you want to talk about? Anything? What do you got? I got something for you. Let's see. Let me go through my headlines, go into Pocket, and try to piece this day together. It's almost going to be impossible at this point. The most outrageous thing, I know what that is. Do I need to hit any other highlights? God damn, there's so much. All right. Here's what I'm going to go to. We got Trump and his story. He's impeachable. We know it. The groundwork is being laid for the Pence impeachment. I don't know if anybody's really talking about that, but it's out there. And I mean, his knowledge as head of the transition, that Flynn was under investigation, that there were so many undisclosed contacts with the Russians, which was also under his jurisdiction because of his position as head of the transition, his cover-up of Flynn's obvious guilt. There's amazing things that we could be nailing Pence with. And then just to clear things up in terms of procedure, since Greg brought it up, were Trump to be impeached and Pence not initially, it would fall to Pence to nominate a vice president for himself, but that would be something that gets voted on in both the House and the Senate. I assume just a simple majority would do the trick, although imagine how politically damaging it would be to get something, to have a close vote on it. That would be huge political damage. I don't know whether he would want, do you think he would want a vice president? He might think he's better off with the vice president. I don't know whether he would decide, should I pick somebody horrible, like unacceptable to Democrats, so that it's impeachment insurance? And would Republicans approve of such a person? I imagine if they could get a solid party line vote on this stuff, I mean, it would do the trick, but they, like I said, they'd be going in as damaged goods. There's never been a situation in history where, I mean, I guess it's few and far between. It would be Ford and Rockefeller were the only ones that we would have done this with. So we got nothing to lean on. I don't know how does the country deal with, I don't know. I was just going to say, how does the country deal with a vice president who's nominated and approved just strictly along partisan lines? And then I realized, the current vice president was approved strictly along partisan lines. It was just in a national election. So I guess there's that too. Maybe we'll be just fine with it. Anyway, I mean, there's some possibility that Pence can't all that easily pick a vice president for himself. Because also, remember, I mean, having just impeached the president, they surely by that point would have gotten around to having implicated Pence in his own right. And in all likelihood, at that point, members of Congress are saying, I'm not going to vote on a vice president for this acting president who I'm about to impeach. No, that's just not going to happen. Now, there may be some complications in terms of people then saying, well, Paul Ryan is next. And of course, Democrats groan about that. What about members of Congress, Republican members of Congress? Would they be willing to say, all right, then we install Paul Ryan? Because yesterday, it was like, I'm doing the chef kissing the fingers thing. Yesterday was fantastic. Oh, look who else is doing that. Athena 5000 saying about my Trump impersonation. I didn't even think that one was any good. The worse I do, the worse I think I do, apparently the better I do with it. I don't know how that happens, but he's so dumb he affects my brain when I'm possessed by the guy and I can't even figure out what's going on. So yesterday, I believe Paul Ryan really almost pretty much disqualified himself for president as well. I don't know if this one's going to stick in the same way. There's certainly not the same volume of evidence against him, but yesterday, the Washington Post broke a story, and I don't even know if I put the Washington Post story aside, but I put the transcript. I certainly did. Okay, here we go. We didn't really discuss this one, but this was one of several afternoon bombshells yesterday. 8:16 p.m. is the posting on this one. House Majority Leader to colleagues in 2016. I think Putin pays Trump. Great headline, but it actually doesn't hit what I think is the true story in this thing because it doesn't quote the transcript. But let's give this one. Everyone was having a good laugh about that one. I cracked up. I mean, honestly, Kevin McCarthy, no genius himself, but on the record, and I mean, what a story that is. My head is in my hands here, saying, I think Putin pays Trump. You've heard the story. You read the story. I got to read it just for background, just to get my head around it and give myself a path. Why is this datelined? Oh, my God. What? This is datelined Kiev? Is that where the writer is? Adam Entos? I'm sure that name. I need Mr. Schlub. Come in here. How does Entos? Entous. How's that pronounced? Why is this datelined Kiev? I guess it doesn't matter, or maybe I'll discover it when I reread this story. Okay. A month before Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination. And that's critical. I'm going to repeat that. A month before Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination. So what are we, June? When does he clinch? Do they mean clinch or when he gets it? Like at the convention? I don't know. This is what it says. A month before Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination, one of his closest allies in Congress. I'm not going to get through this. One of his closest allies in Congress, House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, made a politically explosive assertion in a private conversation on Capitol Hill with his fellow GOP GOP leaders that Trump could be the beneficiary of payments from Russian President Vladimir Putin. All right. Now, this is the story of about how my life got... All right, never mind. Anyway, my life is turned upside down, but that's not my story. This is the story about which people are saying it's possible that he was joking when he said that he believed that Donald Trump was getting paid or could be getting paid by Vladimir Putin. And it's possible, although it stretches some credulity to say, apparently everybody thinks it's possible because the transcript shows that there's laughter involved, interspersed in the discussion at the point at which he, directly after he mentions this, after he says that he thinks Putin could be paying Trump, and you'll get the whole bit later, and there's laughter, and then now he says it's a joke. Now, mind you, he says it's a joke now, but I know this is in this story. Let's just read through this. He says it's a joke, but I don't know whether it really is, and that wasn't his first excuse, and you'll see why. There's two people I think Putin pays. Dana Rohrabacher, and Trump. McCarthy said, now McCarthy, of course, from California, a fellow Californian along with Rohrabacher. This, he said, according to, and this is it, a recording, yes, of the June 15th, 2016 exchange, which was listened to and verified by the Washington Post. Representative Dana Rohrabacher is a California Republican known in Congress as a fervent defender of Putin and Russia. Okay. 1,000 things wrong with those first couple paragraphs, just in terms of the wrongness for America, obviously. It sounds right that it did this. But one, who recorded this? How did this get recorded? I have no idea what's happening here. Why? I don't know why this would be recorded. Thank God it has been recorded. I'm glad we know this. But also, I mean, wrapped up in this story, and I assume they explain it in here. At some point, they ask these guys about this discussion. They deny that it happens. I mean, this is another level of this story. the credibility of everybody in the story is shot, not because of what they say, although it is also shot because of what they say. But in the first instance, it is shot, well, maybe this is the second instance, because they said it first, right? So anyway, in another instance, their credibility is shot because they said, no, they denied that it ever happened. That conversation never took place. And then they said, the Post told them, it's recorded. I have the recording. You want to hear it? Oh, it's recorded? All right. Well, I'm forced to acknowledge it took place, obviously. Here's the new explanation. It was a joke. But it can't be, the whole thing can't be a joke, or at least none of the markers of what they say makes the Trump and Rohrabacher comments a joke are present elsewhere. Let's continue on. House Speaker Paul Ryan immediately interjected, you heard about this, stopping the conversation from further exploring McCarthy's assertion / joke, and swore the Republicans present to secrecy. And that's bad enough also, but that's not the worst thing that happens. Before the conversation, McCarthy and Ryan had emerged from separate talks at the Capitol with Ukrainian Prime Minister Vladimir Groysman. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right. Groysman is how we write it. And this, or how the Post does it anyway. Vladimir Groysman, who had described a Kremlin tactic of financing populist politicians to undercut Eastern European democratic institutions. Stroking the beard. Really? Undermining democratic institutions, paying populists. Wow, I never heard of such a thing. News had just broken the day before in the Washington Post that Russian government hackers had penetrated the computer network of the Democratic National Committee. A democracy in not Eastern Europe, but North America. Gee whiz. And the chief rival of which was a populist politician with murky financing and ties to Russia. What's going on here? Okay, so that's our context. So just the day before, the Washington Post breaks the news of the DNC hack done by Russians, allegedly, prompting McCarthy to shift the conversation from Russian meddling in Europe to events closer to home. Some of the lawmakers laughed at McCarthy's comment. Then McCarthy quickly added, "Swear to God," which is hilarious. Ryan instructed his Republican lieutenants to keep the conversation private, saying, "No leaks. This is how we know we're a real family here." The remarks remained secret for nearly a year. Now, again, back to the question, who's recording this? How did that happen? Don't leak. No leaks. No leaks. He's so concerned about leaks right on the spot, and he cannot figure out that there was a recording going on. I mean, was it surreptitiously done? I don't even know. The conversation provides a glimpse at the internal views of Republican leaders who now find themselves under mounting pressure over the conduct of President Trump. The exchange shows that the Republican leadership in the House privately discussed Russia's involvement in the 2016 election and Trump's relationship to Putin, but wanted to keep their concerns secret. It is difficult to tell from the recording the extent to which the remarks were meant to be taken literally. The House leadership has so far stood by the White House as it has lurched from one crisis to another, much of the turmoil fueled by contacts between Trump or his associates with Russia. House Republican leaders have so far resisted calls for the appointment of an independent commissioner or a special prosecutor. Too bad, you got the prosecutor. To investigate Russian interference, though pressure has been mounting on them to do so after Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey and the disclosure that the president shared intelligence with Russian diplomats. Late Wednesday, Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein announced that he had appointed Robert S. Should we believe that it's Mueller? Robert S. Mueller III, a former prosecutor who served as the FBI director from 2001 to 2013, as special counsel to oversee the Russia probe. Evan McMullin, remember that guy? Who in his role as a policy director to the House Republican Conference participated in the June 15th conversation. Oh my God, I didn't even see this yesterday. Evan McMullin, you'll recall, of course, the last of the never-Trumpers almost, and who actually ran for president. In his role as policy director to the House Republican Conference, participated in the June 15th conversation, said it's true that Majority Leader McCarthy said that he thought candidate Trump was on the Kremlin's payroll. Speaker Ryan was concerned about that leaking. McMullen ran for president last year as an independent and has been a vocal critic of Trump. Now, did McMullen, when did he start with his campaign? I now have to Google this. Evan McMullen. Give me the Wikipedia on him. Bring it up. Here we go. David Evan McMullen, even McMuffin, I almost did it again, is not even like, wow, all right. So I never really did understand that whole drop your first name thing, but okay. Maybe his dad was David Evan McMullen Sr. and he doesn't want to be a junior, so he goes by Evan. I don't know. All right, so what's the deal with this guy? Where's the presidential campaign section? Bring me to that. On August 8th, 2016. Okay, so that's when he announced he's running for president. Imagine that, though, by the way. You're in this conversation with these guys in here, and then you're like, I'm quitting this and I'm running for president. That is a twist I had not even seen yesterday. I was so taken aback by this, and I skimmed this article so fast because I really wanted to go read the transcript. The transcript is the killer in all this. Where was I? Where's this article? I've already lost it. All right, here we go. So, as you know, the article goes on to mention McMullen ran for president. When initially asked to comment on the exchange, Brendan Buck, a spokesman for Ryan, said, "That never happened." And Matt Sparks, a spokesman for McCarthy, said, "The idea that McCarthy would assert this is absurd and false." After being told that the Post would cite a recording of the exchange, Buck, speaking for the House GOP leadership, said, "This entire year-old exchange was clearly an attempt at humor. No one believed the majority leader was seriously asserting that Donald Trump or any of our members were being paid by the Russians. What's more, the Speaker and leadership team have repeatedly spoken out against Russia's interference in our election." Oh, really? "And the House continues to investigate that activity." Sort of. "This was a failed attempt at humor," Sparks said. Ken Grubbs, a spokesman for Rohrabacher, said, "No, it's true." We'll see. Said the congressman had been a consistent advocate of working closer with the Russians to combat radical Islamism. The congressman doesn't need to be paid to come to such a necessary conclusion, but it helps. When McCarthy voiced his assessment of whom Putin supports, suspicions were only beginning to swirl around Trump's alleged Russia ties. Now note, I guess here we'll note again, it's McMullen, and maybe it doesn't matter to you, but at least how does this spin sound to you if I don't even bother, if I don't name names yet? I mean, maybe it doesn't really hurt things if I name names. And I say, okay, now in hindsight, obviously, Ryan and McCarthy are going to deny that this whole thing took place. All right, there's a recording. Okay, we acknowledge it happened, but it was clearly a joke. Okay, it was a huge joke. Now, supposing I say to you, one of the participants in the conversation quits his job and runs for president as a Republican Trump critic who says, I got to run as an independent. It's so bad. The situation is so horrible. I quit my job with the Republicans in the House and run as an independent and say the duty of patriotic Republicans is to not vote for the Republican nominee, but instead to vote for me for president, at least in numbers great enough to deny this man an electoral college victory. And it doesn't matter. It would be better if Hillary Clinton were elected president than if he were elected president. And he was in on this conversation. He hears it and he says, F this, I'm out of here. I'm going to run for president to upend the whole thing if I can, and deny the presidency to Donald Trump. Was it a joke? I don't know. You tell me. Ha ha! Hey, why'd the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side! That's not funny. I'm running for president against your guy. What? How does that follow? It only follows if somebody doesn't think it's a joke. Anyway, at the time, U.S. intelligence agencies knew that the Russians had hacked the DNC and other institutions, but Moscow had yet to start publicly releasing damaging emails through WikiLeaks to undermine Trump's Democratic challenger, Hillary Clinton, they helpfully remind us. An FBI counterintelligence investigation into Russian efforts to influence the presidential election would open the following month. In late July, Comey has said in testimony to Congress, Trump has sought to play down contacts between his campaign and the Russians, dismissing as a witch hunt the FBI and congressional investigations into Russian efforts to aid Trump and any possible coordination between the Kremlin and his associates. Trump denies any coordination with Moscow took place. It may be that some of this stuff was added after I initially read the story. It seemed to me like the story initially was very short. I don't know whether they added maybe I just missed the McMullen stuff. But obviously the witch hunt thing, did Trump say anything about the witch hunt last night, or is he referring to the tweets this morning? I am not sure. Presidential candidate Trump's embrace of Putin and calls for closer cooperation with Moscow put him at odds with the House Republican caucus, whose members have long advocated a harder line on Russia, with the exception of Rohrabacher and a few others. Among GOP leaders in the House, McCarthy stood out as a Putin critic, who in 2015 called for the imposition of more severe sanctions for its actions in eastern Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. And that's all likely true, but then how does McCarthy stand as Trump's greatest ally in Congress, or one of the leading allies in Congress? And it's nonsense. I mean, I'd love to know how that evolution takes place. It's just craven political opportunism is what it is. Anyway, Trump was by then the lone Republican remaining in the contest for the nomination. Though Ryan continued to hold out, Trump picked up endorsements from the remaining GOP leaders in the House, including Representative Steve Scalise, the majority whip from Louisiana. And how does he pronounce? I can still say Scalise, but I'm not sure where he is on the pronunciation. We'll ask Matt Schlub what he thinks. Also present, Republican Conference Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers of Washington, both of whom took part in the June 15th conversation. I may have skipped a part here, by the way. In May of 2016, McCarthy signed up to serve as a Trump delegate at the Republican National Convention, breaking ranks with Ryan, who said he still wasn't ready to endorse the candidate. McCarthy's relationship with Trump became so close that the president would sometimes refer to him as my Kevin. He's such a weirdo. God, that's gross. Anyway, so there you have it. That's the dynamics of what's going on in June 15th. Ryan announced on June 2nd that he would vote for Trump to help unite the party so we can win in the fall, but continued to clash with the candidate, including over Putin. While Trump sought to cast Putin as a better leader than then-President Obama, Ryan dubbed him an aggressor who didn't share U.S. interests. And that's true. On the same day as Ryan's endorsement, Clinton stepped up her attacks on Trump over his public statements praising Putin. If Donald gets his way, they'll be celebrating in the Kremlin, she said. Gee whiz, she was right. Ukrainian officials were unnerved by Trump's statements in support of Putin. Republicans, they had believed, were supposed to be tougher on Russia. When Trump named Paul Manafort as his campaign manager in April of 2016, alarm bells in Kiev started ringing even louder. Manafort was already well known in Ukraine because of his influential role as a political consultant to Viktor Yanukovych, the country's former Kremlin-friendly ruler, until a popular uprising forced him to flee to Russia. Manafort also had consulted for a powerful Russian businessman with close ties to the Kremlin. Ukraine was, in a sense, a testing ground for Manafort, said Ukrainian political scientist Taras Berezovets, my best stab at that name, who became a grudging admirer of Manafort's skills in the dark arts of political stagecraft, while Berezovets, or unless it's Berezovets, was working for one of Yanukovych's political rivals. At the urging of Manafort, Yanukovych campaigned with populist slogans, labeling NATO a menace and casting elites in the Ukrainian capital as out of touch, Berezovets said. Trump struck similar themes during the 2016 campaign. The FBI is now investigating whether Manafort, who stepped down as Trump's campaign manager in August, received off-the-books payments from Yanukovych's party, U.S. officials said. As part of that investigation, FBI agents recently took possession of a newly discovered document that allegedly details payments totaling $750,000. Ukrainian lawmaker Sergei Leshenko, who first disclosed the new document, declined to comment on his contacts with the FBI. He was the one who allegedly was texting to Manafort's daughters. Isn't that right? A spokesman for Manafort has said that Trump's former campaign manager has not been contacted by the FBI. Manafort also disputed the authenticity of the newly discovered document. Groisman, on an official visit to Washington, met separately with Ryan and McCarthy on June 15th at the Capitol. He told them how the Russians meddled in European politics and called for unity in addressing the threat. According to U.S. and Ukrainian officials, this is really, I think, the key part. And pretty soon we'll get to the transcript and you'll see why. So he told them that Russians were meddling in European politics, called for unity in addressing the threat. Ryan issued a statement after the meeting saying the United States stands with Ukraine as it works to rebuild its economy and confront Russian aggression. Later, Ryan spoke privately with McCarthy, Rogers, Scalise, and Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, the deputy whip, among others, including Evan McMullen, which I did not know. Ryan mentioned his meeting with Grossman, prompting Rogers to ask, "How are things going in Ukraine?" according to the recording. The situation was difficult, Ryan said. Grossman, he said, had told him that Russian-backed forces were firing 30 to 40 artillery shells into Ukrainian territory every day. And the Prime Minister described Russian tactics that include, quote, financing our populists, financing people in our governments to undo our governments. Alt-right, excuse me. I'm sorry. I had an attack there. Ryan said Russia's goal was to turn Ukraine against itself. What? Who could have thought? Grossman underlined Russia's intentions, saying, "They're just going to roll right through us and go to the Baltics and everyone else," according to Ryan's summary of the Prime Minister's remarks in the recording. Yes, Rogers said in agreement, noting that the Russians were funding non-governmental organizations across Europe as part of a wider, quote, propaganda war. Maniacal, Ryan said. And guess who's the only one taking a strong stand against it? We are. Wow. Rogers disagreed. We're not, but we're not, she said. And I have questions. What made you say that? I'm really curious. Somebody pointed that one out to me yesterday, and it's a great question. What makes you say, Congresswoman Rogers, that we're not taking a strong stand about? I mean, you aren't, because now you've knuckled under completely. Basically, here's what's happening here. I should just continue. It's a good question. And I might not even need to read you the transcript now, because most of it is reflected in here at this point. I must have just hit the first break in the article and thought that was the end of it yesterday. But wow. Like I said, the most damning thing in here isn't that McCarthy said he thinks Putin was paying Trump. I mean, he is, but that wasn't the most important part. Listen to the way this is getting discussed, right? Ryan is saying, I just met with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and he's saying that the Russians are conducting this maniacal and highly effective propaganda war to turn Ukrainians against Ukrainians by financing populist organizations there and undermining the public's trust in one another and in themselves and in their democratic institutions, such that the Russians are able to dominate and eventually occupy and run Ukraine as a satellite once again. And they know it. They recognize the pattern. The Ukrainians have warned them, and they agree. Now, of course, they pat themselves on the back and say, we're the only ones taking a strong stand against it. But at least one of the Republican leaders says, no, we're not. We're not doing it. And in fact, you're right. You're not doing it. You were at that point issuing strong statements about it, or statements anyway. And so maybe you thought you were doing something. Maybe she just thought that the statements weren't enough, or maybe she could see what was happening. We're not, because at least one of the people in this meeting has already signed on to be a delegate for Trump, and Trump is all about doing the same thing to the United States that has been done to Ukraine. He wants to be the agent, the populist agent, underwritten by Moscow to destabilize the United States of America. It's not just Ukraine. It's not just Eastern European democracies. Now, of course, we've seen it spread to Western European democracies. We were the next ones on the chopping block. I don't know whether that's what she means, but it should have been, because by the end of the year, all of these people who were saying they recognized the threat with respect to Ukraine were saying there was no such threat with respect to the United States. And that was wrong. And they knew it. They knew what was happening. They knew what the Russians were capable of. They knew what the Russians were currently doing. And somebody even had the courage to speak up, joke or not, and say, and I think it's so crazy that they might even be paying Trump to make it happen here. And Ryan's response is, everybody shut up about this. Here's the new instruction. We're joining this team. We are going to get on this bandwagon. We are willing to sell out the United States of America for what? For lowering our tax bills. Our tax bills. Oh, I'm here to pass a tax cut. It's a libertarian dream, right? Yeah, whatever. Look, we know how your tax cuts run. The tax cuts inure to the benefit of people like you, and everybody else, screw them. If you're not in the 1%, you're not getting any kind of serious windfall from this stuff. That's you. You're cutting your own taxes. You just want money. You're actually saying, I will sign up with Russia to undermine the democracy in America, undermine our own sovereignty, undo our government, undo our political institutions, destabilize everything, throw Western civilization in the garbage for money. For money. I don't know how you can stand there as an American conservative and say, I will ally myself with the forces seeking the destruction of Western civilization in exchange for some dollars, which I assume won't be worth very much once we destroy Western civilization. To undermine democracy itself, to undermine the United States of America, I mean, I sound like I'm in the climactic scene. Well, I guess it's not the climactic scene, but one of the climactic scenes of Animal House. The courtroom said, "The United States of America, gentlemen." This is what has happened here. What the upshot of this transcript, and that is by far the more important point than whether McCarthy was joking or not, or even whether, if he wasn't joking, whether it was true, it's actually less important to me to find out that Trump was being paid by Putin. I mean, that would be a surprise if he was cutting him checks. He's paying him in other ways, all these real estate transactions, but, and bailouts of all sorts. And we didn't even get to that one today. Who knows when we'll get to the story of up in Toronto, but this story here, by far the more amazing thing is that they've just met with the Ukrainian prime minister. They've just admitted to one another that they've become convinced of the danger that Russia poses. They've just mentioned that they actually understand the methods that the Russians are using to undermine democracy in Eastern Europe. And then at the first hint that it could be happening in America, they say either it was a joke or everyone shut up about it or both. And then within a month, they're all on board with it. They knew what was happening in June, and by July, when they had the convention, everybody was in. Let's do this. So, Trump yesterday compromises himself to the point of near impeachment. Pence has now compromised himself to the point of near impeachment by having presided over the transition in which he approved of giving clearance and authority to Flynn, who he knew to be a paid foreign agent and who was actually taking $500,000 bribes to look the other way on ISIS, of all things, for God's sake. So now the baton is passed to Speaker Paul Ryan, who is here on this tape. And again, I'm flabbergasted. Who's taping this? How did this happen? And he is here on tape saying, yes, I know it's all true. Let's do it anyway. And let's do it to our own country. And if we do, our team wins. And we'll all pay less in taxes. We'll become even richer. It's worth it. Let's do it. Amazing. Just to finish this up, by the way, in terms of taking a look at the highlights of the transcript, if there's even a point to it, right? Here's Rogers, by the way, again, saying we're not doing anything about it. And I really would love to know what she meant or what she thought she meant at the time. So that's when McCarthy brought the conversation about Russian meddling around to the DNC hack. Trump and Rohrabacher as well. I'll guarantee you that's what it is. The Russians hacked the DNC and got the Oppo research, the opposition research that they had on Trump at the DNC. McCarthy said with a laugh. Ryan asked who the Russians delivered the opposition research to. Well, there's two people I think Putin pays. Rohrabacher and Trump, McCarthy said, drawing some laughter. He doesn't laugh. Swear to God, McCarthy added. That's when Ryan then says, this is an off the record. And then some lawmakers laugh at that. No leaks, all right, Ryan added. And then there's more laughter. This is how we know we're a real family here. That's how you know that we're tight, Scalise said. What's said in the family stays in the family, Ryan added. How is it that there's a tape recording rolling? I mean, is somebody wearing a wire? Is it a hot mic? I'd love to know. No answers on that one yet, but the fuller transcript reveals everything. And by the way, the dodge that this is a joke and the signal that this is supposed to be a joke is, well, just look at the transcript. It says laughter. Okay. Well, what about the whole rest of the part where you're discussing the seriousness of the Russian plots to undermine democracies all over Europe by paying populist politicians and populist figures and putting money into non-governmental organizations and populist movements, such as they may be, around the world and turn countrymen against countrymen and undermine their democratic institutions and their trust in them? You've all acknowledged that that's to be the case. Not a chuckle, not a titter. There's no indication whatsoever of any laughter for this whole entire conversation. It isn't until they bring up Trump and Rohrabacher possibly getting paid that they start laughing. And McCarthy's immediate response is to say, swear to God, which is always a great line to follow up a joke with. But, I don't know, people could do it. But if the appearance of laughter is the cue to it being a joke, then clearly they are not joking up front. And that's deadly serious. They knew exactly what was going on, and they either, some of them, opted to do nothing or affirmatively signed on with the program of bringing that program to the United States. Amazing. And they are our top congressional leadership. What are we going to do with these people? I don't know. The answer is, I'm stuck. I'm stumped on that one. They all have to go, obviously. What happens after you impeach the Speaker of the House? No idea. It's written somewhere. I mean, Secretary of State, does that make Rex Tillerson president? I don't know. I forget exactly where it goes. Pro tem, Senate President pro tem. Orrin Hatch, I guess that is now at this point. One of these days, and I guess maybe Friday would be a good day to go over the technical stuff. Just because there's too much happening today. But yeah, I got to read through the CRS report that Greg provided to me that'll help give us some information on the mechanics of special prosecutors and independent commissions and who gets to do what and what are they going to be looking into and what would they be prohibited from looking into as well. Let's take a look at this here. We got some other notes coming in that I have to catch up with. Justice saying, by the way, nothing says disaster capitalism more than Ryan and McCarthy, quote, joking about taking advantage of Russia meddling in our election. And that's exactly what it is, of course. So they saw the opportunity to turn an affirmative program of Russian meddling in Western democracy and indeed to undo all of the institutions of Western civilization. And what a conservative thing that is to do, by the way. We're literally overturning Western civilization for money. Well, that's disaster capitalism for you, yes. Another note that I need to catch up on that Justice sent my way from way back in the discussion when we had Greg on, and I had raised my eyebrows at the mention of Senator Eagleton. And I, remember our old pal? You'll remember his name coming up. Back in, either your far-flung memories or history class, depending on how old you are. Eagleton, he helpfully points out for us, yes, making the historical connection, had been McGovern's vice presidential pick, but dropped when Eagleton was smeared over his previous psychiatric therapy. Yes. So not surprising that he ended up voting no on Ford. Good point. And again, another one of those plot points that makes it understandable and it makes American politics more understandable, yes. Absolutely. But it makes American politics more understandable in terms of, like costumed masterpiece theater stuff. I've been watching it's not masterpiece theater, but the White Princess stuff. I remember I mentioned a couple of years ago that I was really intrigued by the White Queen series, which was on Starz Network or something. Well, now they're back with, a follow-up of The Next Generation, I guess. Star Trek The Next Generation. But for Uber, but for the English succession. And the intrigues there, the way people did a lot of stuff, a lot of the historical part of it gets left out. It's actually, real life is far too confusing and complex for presentation in 1 hour bites. Even 2 hour bites, as we're finding out this morning. All right. What else do we need to squeeze in here today? I think maybe we'll put the emphasis on squeezing more stories in rather than more detail. Because, although the detail is what makes it so much fun. Let's see. Where are we? Boy, there's a lot. That seems like detail. This one is detail. Let's add this. From Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo. This headline, we never did get around to reading all the bio pieces on Jared Kushner. Things just moved too quickly, and now I'm sure we're sorry we didn't do it. But anyway, here's a headline that grabbed my attention. Wake up, Kushner's a baddie too, by Josh Marshall. The very latest reports out this morning, that would be yesterday morning, have it that Jared Kushner was a major voice pushing to fire James Comey. Maybe this is what I snagged for the China story. Let's see. And the president is angry, and that's in quotes, over the backlash to his decision. A shadow of uncertainty must hang over every report like this. We're hearing these details through interested parties. A yacht basin Lord of the Flies, with different faction leaders gouging each other's eyes out as the executive branch descends into chaos. What I want to focus on for this moment, however, is the recurring insistence on treating these decisions as matters of inexperience or flawed press strategies or, somewhat more credibly, impulse control. No one is so inexperienced or naive as to fail to understand that when you fire someone who might discover your crimes or misdeeds, that you're doing something wrong. I read in one of the seemingly limitless numbers of reports on Trump's immediate reaction to the Comey backlash that there was anger at his communications staff for allowing the story to go wrong. There are so many levels on which we can understand this. The helpless, hapless, and ridiculous White House communications staff, the fact that the White House is openly interviewing possible replacements for Spicer, and having those replacements talk to the press, this 70-year-old man's complete inability to take responsibility for his own actions. The major thing, though, is a simple misunderstanding of what a communication staff is or can possibly do. There was no communication strategy, no preparation that could have prevented the massive backlash at Comey's firing because the act itself was an abuse of power of the highest order. Preparation could have made the press strategy less comical. It could not have made it more effective. But the president, at some essential level, appears not to be the only one who fails to realize this. Reporters sometimes have a difficult time looking beyond the procedural realities of government, if only because the procedural realities of government are less charged than the substantive ones when the substantive ones get this bad. But it's not just press strategies versus the facts of what actually happened. It's also this matter of inexperience, particularly with people like Jared Kushner. As I said above, no one is that experienced. When you do things to cover up your wrongdoing or crimes, and I think he meant that inexperienced. I would read it that way. When you do things to cover up your wrongdoing or crimes, you do it because you are aware of your wrongdoing and want to evade exposure or punishment. When I saw this report about Kushner this morning, I even mocked his reputation as a moderating influence on the president, but that doesn't really cut it. We can't be certain of the accuracy of this particular report, but assuming it is true, and more importantly, because we have numerous other confirmed reports of similar behavior, we should draw the obvious conclusion. Kushner himself is a bad actor, performing the same abuses of power by proxy. My only uncertainty is whether Kushner is committing these bad acts to cover up his own wrongdoing along with his father-in-law's, or whether it is only his father-in-law's. In practice, I suspect that both on the political and business front, they are so intertwined as to be indistinguishable. Of course, people are innocent until proven guilty, There is also a huge amount of factual information we don't have yet, but in any other case, we would interpret these kinds of actions as showing consciousness of guilt and constituting prima facie evidence of bad acts. That should be the default assumption, backed up, let's not forget, by a good deal of factual information as well, in this case, too. All true, obviously. But, so this wasn't the one that made the assertion about his reaction being to the news in China. But, let's see. There we go. Here's the tweet that led me to it. Whose tweet is it? Juliette Kayem. Again, not sure of how I'm pronouncing the last name. Let's see. A CNN analyst, among other things. Juliet says Kushner pushed for Comey firing after stories broke about his sister in China. Remember when she was selling the visas in China and green cards? And that the FBI probe was expanding to financial dealings. So she's leaning here on a tweet from Nora O'Donnell, which reads that sources tell us Kushner was a prominent voice advocating Comey's firing, and the president's angry that move has created a firestorm. Nora O'Donnell relying on the reports of Major Garrett at CBS on that one. So you got the chain of custody on that. So I haven't seen that reflected in the reporting just yet, but it doesn't surprise me. But again, I haven't looked in for the reporting. I'm sure that by now, usually a tweet like that will be followed up by a report on it. Let's see what's out there. Kushner, China, Comey. See anybody get a hit on that one? Let's see. Here's a New York Times piece here. But these are all going back to May 8th and the original reporting of her visit to China. So I don't know whether anybody has written that up or not, but I'll put that out. That seemed likely enough that I wanted it out there and on the record on this day of really entering as much evidence into the record as possible. Let's see. The other things that I mentioned Toronto briefly, and I'm pretty sure, God, I mean, really, my queue, here in Pocket is overflowing as well. There's so many things that people sent to me. Man, how do we get all this on the record? Where's the Toronto story? The story here was that there was a Russian bank, and that it was a bank that Kushner subsequently sat down for a meeting with, but a Russian bank that, and this, I know it's in my Twitter stream here if I take a look and try and dig it up just so I have an article, a citation for you on this one, and we'll see whether it is also is it in the KITM hashtag parade here somewhere? This would have been sometime yesterday. The long story short on this one, from recollection, and I'll get you the citation too, was that it was a Russian bank, I guess, essentially comes to the financial rescue of Trump's partner in what I think was the Trump Tower in Toronto, the condo and office complex in Toronto, which I think since the condo owners voted to remove the Trump name from the tower. But I guess that project, like many others, was in financial difficulty. And I don't know whether Trump's interest in this one was in development or whether it was simply a licensing of the name. And sometimes he has a combination package where he'll license the name and then they'll do a management package. We want payments to manage the property, and he gets his money that way. And of course, if that deal begins to fall through, then he's not going to make his money. He's not going to get his contract paid. So it's in, of course, his financial interest, and very clearly in his financial interest, to have his partners propped up in this. And guess who decided to stand up and help out this partner? Russia, or a Russian bank anyway. And I guess as corrupt as Russia is, it seems pretty clear that anything a major Russian financial player does. It has got the okay of, or is at least subject to the assassination of the bank president, if it does not have the okay of President Putin. All right, let's see. I'm scrolling back to see if I can find the story. I will turn it up and share it with you, at least just to give you some sense of where my mistaken assertions came from, if that's what it turns out to be. But how does this fit into our puzzle? Important this way. It goes actually to, well, a lot of things, but let's say it goes most directly, let's say, to the assertion of his lawyer's so-called certified letter, which said that, he was getting no income. He has no dealings with Russia. He was getting no income from Russia. I don't have any deals there, blah, blah, blah. One of the many ways that Trump benefits financially from Russian intervention without counting as income from Russia, besides hiding things through a network of blind ownership of LLCs established in tax havens around the world, is this. When a Trump partner who pays Trump directly, but which isn't Russian, gets in trouble and is then in danger of not being able to make those payments to Trump, it is often a Russian or oligarch or Russian bank, some Russian connected entity steps in to find the cash to keep the partner afloat, probably for the purposes of making sure that the partner can continue to make payments to Donald Trump. I don't know. I mean, that may not be all of Russia's interest, and their interests may be less direct than that. It may, in fact, be, well, I mean, as an investment strategy for Russian banks and Russian oligarchs, if they're interested in turning Trump into an asset or continuing to milk him as an asset, one of the things they'll want to do is keep him afloat, and another thing that they'll want to do is keep the flotation devices controlled by strings that lead all the way back to Russia eventually. So it might be an investment strategy to look for distressed Trump properties, find out what the distress is, and in many cases it's a partner who's becoming distressed in all this because they've been dumb enough to invest with Trump. And Trump usually has deals that essentially hide, or leave the exposure on the partners. He just takes a smaller cut and a smaller fee, but none of the serious financial exposure in developing a building like this. It falls to everybody else to lose their shirts if they can't sell the units. But he's being paid for the name, and the name is there, and that was the marketing tool you wanted. And if it fails you, that's your fault, but you still have to pay me for my contract. But it's a great way. If you shopped around for distressed properties that were Trump connected or Trump partnered and offered, instead of going directly to Trump and saying, I'll pay you, because that's too obvious, especially if we actually at this point think you're going to run for president and have some chance of having you win, although how they figured that, I don't know, but, if they're just guessing, right? A great way to keep Trump in money but put some distance between yourselves is to go shopping for distressed Trump-branded properties, find the distressed partner, and bail out the distressed partner. That way, money continues to flow to Trump. His name doesn't turn to mud before the election, improving the chances that he can actually pull this thing off, if anybody was even looking at if people were looking at his financial records seriously and really evaluating them objectively, they would never have voted for him. But we know that isn't going to happen. Anyway, point is that it's just another way to put Russian dollars in Trump's pockets without any fingerprints, and you should consider it in that light. Another story that we have to put on the record, holy moly, is a minor one in the scheme of things, but I got to scroll back to find this thing. Here we go. Washington Post also with this story, this time Matea Gold. Trump's huge Caribbean estate is on the market for $28 million, prompting questions, including my own question of what happened to the promise of no foreign deals. well, this one isn't a deal. Of course, it's not. When we said we'd be doing no more foreign deals, I think it's obvious to anyone, with their ears open on this, is that I wasn't going to be entering into any more deals on hotels or major buildings. This is a personal property. I'm just selling a personal property. There's nothing wrong with that. I never said I wasn't going to do that. In fact, this is exactly what my critics say they wanted me to do. I'm divesting. Now, we never said you needed to divest yourself of your personality, obviously. But, look, here's what's going to happen. He's got a giant mansion somewhere in the Caribbean. St. Martin, as it turns out. The story tells us this. The opulent beachfront estate that recently went on the market on the Caribbean island of St. Martin has a number of appealing factors, including 2 elaborately adorned villas and an expansive pool overlooking the crystalline waters of Plum Bay. By the way, anybody ever heard a story of him going to this place? I mean, even when he wasn't president. Clearly we didn't keep close track of his travels at that point. But when does he go to these places? I don't think a lot of them I don't think he does. I mean, I think he just buys them because they're signature properties. And at first he might have been thinking, they're just such great properties, I just want to own them. Maybe I'll turn it into a club in St. Martin. And that's clearly a possibility for him, But I think he bought it and he rents it out. But I think he may also. There's a lot of properties I think he wants to lend to people to buy favors with. If you're going to St. Martin, you should stay in my place. If you're going to, if you're like he's got did you know this? He's got the townhouse right outside of the golf club here in Virginia at Trump National. Not only does he own the golf club itself, but there's a townhouse nearby, very, plain old townhouse, which came to my attention during the campaign somehow as we were kind of looking at Trump's penchant for surveillance technologies and its use inside the Trump organization. And apparently he lends this townhouse to politicians and others as a sort of a safe house, where they can stay. Although why they would be staying in Loudoun County, I have no idea. But then they found out the whole thing is wired with cameras and who knows what else. So allegedly for security purposes, because it's a high crime area, I guess, right? It isn't. Anyway, back to this story. He's got this beautiful estate here, Le Chateau des Palmiers. Which is, I guess, the name of it. My French is terrible. But at any rate, he's putting it on the market. He's selling it. He's never going to get a chance to go there. It's beautiful. It's very nice. He could have developed it into a club, I guess. Maybe it doesn't have nearly as much room as Mar-a-Lago. But apparently it's been being rented out. They did say it's in the story. It's unclear why the property is for sale. It earned Trump between $200,000 and $2 million in rental fees between 2014 and mid-2016, according to financial disclosures. And that's just because those are the ranges that they give you. How much did you earn from this property? $0 to $100,000, $100,000 to $200,000, $200,000 to $2 million. I don't remember what the ranges are. But anyway, the effort to sell the high-priced real estate in the midst of Trump's tenure could present a similar ethical problem to the one his lawyers cited in defending his decision not to sell off his company after the election. That is, a buyer could overpay as a way to gain currency with the president. And of course, we know that he has had that happen. And it's one of the areas one of the few exceptions that his law firm was willing to admit to, the sale of the Palm Beach mansion. But so bottom line, if you want to bribe Trump right now, the thing to do is pay something more than $28 million, although I don't know why the listing price is $28 million. My guess is that he bought it for 10 or something, and that's why it's a $28 million. But if you want to get on his good side, offer 50. Hit the buy it now button and buy it for $50 million. You buy yourself, it's a beautiful place. You won't be disappointed. And you get Trump's attention. You send him $50 million and everybody's happy. All right. Pretty amazing. Anyway, what's happening going on out here? All right. I'm just watching. There's some like crazy, everybody's, tweeting pictures of Ben Sass and Chuck Schumer, outside of the Capitol building hanging out. And it's a little weird. And now Ben Sass saying, holy moly, it looks like Senator Schumer and I are smoking reefer outside a wedding. And it does. And Schumer says, that escalated quickly. Well, that's a nice humorous diversion from the tragedy going on here. But anyway, now you can bribe him by sending him $25 to $50 million and getting a nice estate out of it on St. Martin. And of course, he will regard that as not being one of the foreign deals that he insisted he wasn't going to engage in because it's private property, but the money goes to him just the same. And since the lawyers were just busy telling everybody that everything almost all of his businesses are pass-through corporations anyway, then there's no difference between his selling a personal holding and taking it to a Russian and taking in revenue through any parts of the Trump organization from a Russian either. It's all the same. It all goes in the same pocket. That was their point, and so it's my point again today. All right. So I think, let's see, we hit Toronto is on the record. St. Martin is on the record. Flynn and his payments from the Turkish is on the record. Nunes sort of kind of made the record in this. We noted for the record in passing in one of the other readings that Manafort is on the record and is now part of the probe that allegedly Mueller will be taking a look at. And okay, man, that I think that hits it all with okay, one more news exception. I just want to put this one out there. This one's not nearly as important, but I only have a minute left. We'll do it anyway. Steve Bannon pulls out of speech at top Washington think tank. Amanda Turkle reporting at HuffPost. And this one really just offered up in terms of what the hell were you thinking? And I guess that's what occurred to the rest of the scholars at the Brookings Institution, too. That's the place we're talking about. And apparently they invited him to give a speech there. And the staff said, what are you, crazy? You don't give a forum to this kind of idiot, and particularly not our forum. And I guess it's becoming undone now. And I guess they offered Bannon the opportunity to say he was the one pulling out of it rather than just canceling it on him. But good question as to why they might even contemplate such a thing. What he was going to tell them, I have no idea. But more of his pseudo-intellectual babble, I'm sure, about whatever his theory is about the conflict of civilizations. Although it would have been interesting to hear him speechify a little bit about the brilliance of Western civilization and the need to preserve it as against, I mean, in his view, radical Islam, especially given the fact that maybe somehow, unbeknownst to him, he's allied himself with the Russians who have a very similar goal. They just have a different view of what constitutes Westernism than Bannon and, for that matter, Richard Spencer does. Apparently, our American neo-Nazis are under the impression that the dual foci, I guess, of Western civilization are Washington and Moscow, amazingly enough. And I guess they consider now the Russians to be Western. Well, I guess in comparison with radical Islamists, if that's such a thing, in the Middle East, I suppose it's arguable. But it's been a long time part of Russian foreign policy to distinguish itself from the West, even as they westernized, to still distinguish themselves from the West and to shift the focus and locus of power to Moscow wherever possible, even if that means undermining the rest of Western civilization to do it. I don't know that he's grasped that. I don't know if it's a real theory. I don't know what's going on, but I do know this. It's time to hand the microphones over to the guys at the after show. I think I did a pretty decent job at doing some cleanup today. Let's see what they've got on tap. An immigrant found dead in his cell was kept in solitary confinement for 19 days. Another big news story of the day. White Tulsa police officer Betty Shelby acquitted in the fatal shooting of an unarmed black man who had his hands in the air. And right-wing extremist Sheriff David Clark presided over a jail where an inmate died of thirst and where women were forced to give birth in shackles. He's coming
From
to
Daily
the Department
Codes
of
Radio
Homeland Security.
On networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
with David Waldman.
A long last half here, they'll be reporting that Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort emerge as key figures in the criminal and counter-espionage probe as Special Counsel Robert Mueller takes over the Russia investigation, and the FBI, in conjunction with other federal agencies investigating Russia, and Ambassador Kislyak's work with Michael Flynn, setting up a back channel. Remember that one? Amazing, and it's all next.